Now let's get into the topic we really want to hear from you about, and that's talking about what are these early signs of injury. So what kind of things should we pay attention to that can cue us about these early signs? What do you usually see in runners?
It will depend on the injury. Like, the body does an amazing job of messaging us, giving these alerts with different signals. Well, first of all, pain. Any sort of little niggles and pain is something to pay attention to. Someone can train really hard and then the next morning have some new symptoms that are worth paying attention to, particularly when it comes to tendinopathies. We know that a classic presentation of tendinopathies or plantar fasciitis might not be pain. It might be stiffness. It might be just mild soreness. And if you pay attention to that the next morning when you first wake up and see how the body's responding, that can be a clear sign that the body is being overloaded or under-recovered in one way or another. Particularly for tendinopathies, it can be really tricky for interpreting accurately these sorts of things, because you can go back to a run that day and maybe the first 10 seconds is a little bit niggly, but then you're fine and you're running pain-free because everything's warmed up. But then the next morning, again, you're hobbling around and it's a little bit worse than the morning before. And so these early signs may be pain. It might be stiffness. It might be tightness. A lot of people like to put certain attributes or characteristics to these to try and convince themselves they're not getting injured. They say, oh no, it's just tightness. But how long has that tightness been there? Oh, maybe 2-3 days, and only because I've been running so hard. And yes, that can be a helpful or necessary process that needs to happen. It could be this delayed onset muscle soreness, which people, want to have in order to get stronger. But sometimes this delayed onset muscle soreness can carry over and become like 5 or 7 days long. And let alone do you think it's not actually DOMS, it's actually an injury. And so it's pretty clear that you need to interpret these sort of things. You need to say, okay, what are the characteristics of delayed onset muscle soreness? What are the characteristics of an injury? There might be some overlapping characteristics in between the two, but as soon as something develops into the signs and symptoms that we don't like, that's when you should be really proactive with how you start training.
Yeah. What do you say to your runners that you work with who seem to be kind of rationalizing their symptoms? So it's just a little tight. It's not a big deal. Like, it's been fine. It's been tight the last week. Like, that kind of rationalization. How do you usually approach that with your runners?
I usually say, okay, well, how long have they had it for? How severe is it? How disruptive is it? What are you feeling like the next day? If you wake up one morning and there's a bit of tightness and a little bit of soreness around your knee and you're not too sure if it's, just tight and you're not sure if it is an injury, well, you ask them, okay, well, if you go for a run that day and then the next morning, how is it? Is it worse than the morning before? Then you know that it's probably, something that you need to pay more attention to. And it's probably just rationalizing how long they've had it for, because most of the runners that get to me and eventually, if we jump on a chat and start talking about their injury, they've usually had it for like 3 weeks or 3 months. And sometimes it's, oh no, but it's okay. It hasn't disrupted my training. I can still do all these things, but it just hasn't gone away. And you say, okay, well, if it hasn't gone away, what are the odds it's going to go away spontaneously if you keep doing what you're doing? The odds are going to be quite low. And so it's rationalizing these sort of things. Most people think that they're just managing a niggle or they're just managing tightness, but it just persists for months. And I sort of just rationalize to them, if you've had it for months, you kind of need to change something. The odds of it getting better on its own are very, very low. So get it assessed or change something in your management, that training versus recovery sort of thing, and pay attention to it. And I had so many responses. I had so many people like chatting about their injuries to me to be like, oh yes, you're totally right. I've convinced myself it's just a niggle, but I've had it for 6 months and it's disrupted my training here and there. It just hasn't got better or hasn't got worse. It's those sort of scenarios where people just ignore it, but they really shouldn't.
Yeah. Would you say there are things that runners should, or that they can test by themselves at home? Or is it more important to pay attention to patterns of symptoms like you've been talking about with kind of how it responds the next day and over weeks, kind of week-to-week assessment or day-to-day assessment? Or are there certain tests that you think people can do at home at all?
I think there could be, obviously depending on the injury. I think identifying like long-term trends, usually with symptoms, like say pain is a characteristic, you can, I guess, scale that out of 10. Most PTs and physios are used to asking those sort of questions. What is it like during the run? What is it like after a run? What is it like the next morning when you first wake up? Just like those snapshots in time, and then just see what it's like on your non-running days, see what it's like on your running days, see what it's like on your cross training, and then what's it like week by week. I think that's a pretty nice analysis for people to follow to see if they're really, truly getting better. And tests that they can do, there's usually some sort of movement or stretch or exercise that produces symptoms. If we're talking about the knee, we're looking at like squats or like walking upstairs. If we're looking at plantar fasciitis, that just might be walking barefoot first thing in the morning. If we're looking at, say, like your Achilles, it might be doing a calf raise or some sort of test or stretch that most people are familiar with that produces their symptoms. You can repeat that. You can do that, once a day and see if that's tracking on the improve. There's a UK physio, Tom Goom, who talked about a patient who had proximal hamstring tendinopathy, and they had the leg moisturizer test where they, put their foot up on the sink and sort of stretched forward and moisturized their leg. But as they stretched that hamstring, it would produce soreness. And so they called that like the moisturizer test. You do the moisturizer test every day, see what your pain is like out of 10, and then we can track whether there's any improvement or not.
Yeah.
I like that was called the moisturizer test. And I want to encourage people, what Brody's talking about is, honestly, a lot of the most accurate tests for most tissues is either pushing on them or loading them. There's all these fancy, like special, and a lot of the physiotherapy students will out there will be being exposed to all the special tests, these kind of stuff. But you'll find if you review those, the reliability, the specificity, the sensitivity isn't that hot when compared to just, hey, a simple activity that loads or stretches or palpates the tissue. So yeah, it's sometimes these simple movements like, yeah, if it hurts there, that might be what that is. Be that simple. Sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's just super reproducible at home by finding the thing that bothers you and just choosing the appropriate increment of when to retest it. I think sometimes I find people who it's like every hour, they're like, does it still hurt? Does it still hurt? Does it still hurt? That can become problematic because you're just continually straining the structure that's actually irritated. So choosing, like you just said, Brody, whether if it's every day or if it's even every other day or every week, and just getting an assessment of, does this thing still produce the symptoms? Because if it is worse, you know what that means. If it's better, you're on the right track. So such an easy way to assess yourself at home. That's awesome.
Yeah. Just don't pick at the scab.
Yes, don't pick at the scab, exactly. So, Brody, I have so many questions for you, and I don't know if I'll even get to ask them all, because I just want to pick your brain on how you approach certain things. But let's talk about when these early signs pop up, the tightness, the soreness, kind of it's sticking around. What do you tell people to do? What should we do if you're starting to notice some of these kind of niggles?